what I love about reading is being able to not get stuck in your own head and your own life and your own space, but kind of being able to look outside yourself.
I wasn't sure if I could expect students to read anything. The impulse to meet students where they are just meant meeting them, kind of lower and lower down the ladder.
It's the things that we don't do, that we could do, that are changing the nuanced meaning of what it means to read.
I'm Julie Rose, and this is Top of Mind. I have been a radio journalist for 2 decades, but a few years ago, I found myself avoiding the news for long stretches because of how depressing and divisive it all seems. I still wanted to be informed and engaged on important issues, though, and I figured I couldn't be alone in that. So we created this podcast. Each episode, we tackle one tough topic in a way that will challenge you, help you feel more empathy, and empower you to become a better citizen, a kinder neighbor, and a more effective advocate. Today, Americans are reading fewer books. Should we worry?
We had a system that every night we read stories together before they went to bed. During the day, we had time for them set up to read. As they grew up, I tried to nurture that love of reading in them.
This is Della Cassia.
My kids are 15 and 13, so a 15-year-old girl and a 13-year-old boy. I don't know if it was a result of COVID or as a result of them becoming teenagers, but that love of reading just slowly was put away in favor of sports, in favor of other things, extracurricular activities, everything else other than reading. And that was a very big struggle for me to accept because I'm an avid reader.
Cassia fell in love with reading as a child in Lebanon during the country's civil war in the 1980s.
You didn't have really electricity even to watch TV or anything, but we had a lot of books at home. And there was a library that was like in a cave that my mom would wait until there were no bombs, until it was safe to go outside. And she would take me. And it was a tiny little room, probably as big as a small bathroom, and just stocked with books. We would literally have to walk around half an hour away and just to go grab a few books and bring them back. And then that's what I would do. I would read and I would write. That's how I fell in love with reading and writing. I would be sitting in a shelter by candlelight reading books while the world was happening around me. And I love that feeling of getting to learn about the world through books, being transported to different places, right? Letting your imagination soar, just understanding different perspectives and different ideas. And so as a mom, I want my kids to be readers. That's first and foremost.
But when her kids started losing interest at the ages of 8 and 10, Cassia worried that pushing them might backfire.
I don't want to make reading a chore. And this is where that inner struggle, I had to step back and go, okay, I don't want them to hate reading, so where do we draw that line? And they helped me find the balance, believe it or not, because at that age, they were more curious about the world than wanting to read about it in books, if that makes sense. They were more curious about asking questions, about being involved, versus just reading fiction stories in books.
Americans are reading fewer books across the board. We reported reading about 12 books on average in 2022, and that is the lowest number since Gallup started polling on this in the 1990s. A different survey from 2023 shows nearly half of U.S. adults didn't read or listen to even one book that year. And it's no wonder. Book reading has to compete with endless news feeds and social media sites, streaming services, even podcasts for free time. Teachers are starting to worry about this too. College professors report their incoming freshmen seem unable to stick with long, complicated texts. At the high school level, teachers are taking novels off the curriculum entirely, sticking to excerpts and movie versions of the classics. All of this at a time when reading scores for 4th and 8th graders, the 2 grades that are tested on the nation's report card, are at a 20-year low. New technology is also changing when, where, and how we read. You can listen to an audiobook in places you would never read a physical book, like when you're driving, for example, or doing the dishes. And just one e-reader can store thousands of books, which makes reading more transportable and accessible. But even the ease of modern tech has not reversed the overall decline. And it begs new questions like, do our brains interact with the screen in the same way they interact with a paper page? And does listening to a book really count as reading it? Today on Top of Mind, Americans are consuming less and less book-length material. Does that matter in 2025? Now, Della Cassia has seen this issue both as a mom and an educator. She's a high school English teacher for an online charter school, and she also teaches journalism classes at a community college. Plus, she's a former journalist and a freelance writer. While her high school English students do struggle to get through their assigned reading, she's relieved that her own son and daughter don't seem to have that problem. They may not choose to read for fun, but they'll do it for school.
Right now, as a high school student and a middle school student, I don't see any red flags as far as learning is concerned. I see my daughter sitting and reading Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn, and analyzing the text for her AP classes. I see my son reading poems. For me, the struggle is because I'm a reader. I want to see my daughter on a Sunday cuddled on the couch with a book reading. That would make my mom's heart happy. But it's not making her happy. For now, I have to take their cue, I feel, and not make reading a chore. If they're learning about the world from all the things around them, then I don't see the problem with that. You can make everything a teachable moment instead of just saying, here is a book, read more about it. Let's talk about Abraham Lincoln. Let's talk about the civil rights. Let's talk about immigration. They wanted to know a lot about their culture. I am Lebanese. My husband is Armenian. I grew up during the Civil War. There were a lot of questions about what happened during the Civil War. How did you survive? Those questions led to just mini lessons along the way, talking about the world. The other thing that I did is I never turned the news off at home. And even social media, if used correctly, it can also let you understand and see things and hear about things. And, movies, the same thing. They're still having that imagination. They're still thinking, but they're doing it in a different way.
It was the same urge, it sounds like, to sort of learn and experience, but you used the option you had, which was books from the seller.
Exactly.
And your kids just have a lot of other options.
Exactly. And I feel that when I'm reading a book, I can read it, close the book, and think about the characters and the themes and analyze all of that. For my kids, they do that when they're watching a movie or they're when listening to a podcast or when we're having a conversation. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, this is like that, and this is what happened. And I wonder if he did this, what would have happened like that? So it's just a different mindset.
And do you think that kids have sort of just been conditioned differently because of all of the internet and digital and sort of multimedia exposure that maybe getting lost in a book is like no longer as relevant to modern life?
I think you just said exactly what it is. Kids these days want to make the connections between the real world and what they're reading, what they're seeing, what they're studying, what they're learning.
So with her high school English students and her college undergraduates, Cassia has to be a little more strategic with her lesson plans because they don't make connections or tap into their natural curiosity in quite the same way her own kids do.
We don't really do full novels anymore. We used to quite a bit. Now, when I plan my lessons for my high school and my college students, it's no longer, here's a novel, read it like I learned. We read a few story excerpts from different books here and there. We read poetry, we're going to do the Harlem Renaissance. But as far as novels, we've read The Great Gatsby the first semester. We will read The Crucible the second semester. But that's really about it. I have to take each book I'm teaching and connect it to the world around them. Because when we're talking about Gen Z, especially, they were born with phones. That's all they know. So everything is in short bursts because of their attention spans. And everything has to make sense and connect to the world around them these days.
I can really see how you're describing that they're learning a really important skill, which is how to connect the dots and see themes and sort of do this critical analysis. They just don't do the reading. They just don't maybe have the stamina, I guess, or the willpower to have the stamina to sort of read 50 pages every night in order to kind of slog through a book,
Right.
whether they get lost in it or not.
Yeah, they don't have the stamina. It's a stamina that I had growing up, and maybe, you have or still has. They don't. They get interested when you say, by the way, some themes in the crucible, persecution, apply to what's going on in the world today. Can you go on social media and grab some posts, and show me? Can you go to the New York Times website or whatever other newspaper's website, find an article that connects with this? That's when they go, aha. But if you're just reading chapter after chapter after chapter, the question I get from my students all the time is, why do I care? This happened back in the 1600s, 1700s. Why do I care? And I say, you care because guess what? This is happening today, and you're going to show me how.
Yeah. So, I mean, have you had parents or other teachers or members of the community or school board members who are like, why aren't you making the kids read more? Like, we had to read 4 novels our first semester when I was in junior English. Like, what? Do you have to defend your choices, do you find, very often?
I really haven't. I've actually had parents complain that we're making their kids work too hard. Like, my mom would have never dreamt of calling a school and saying, you're making my daughter work too hard. But these days, that's what I get. And that's unfortunate. Parents are more into making their kids emotionally ready versus drilling that learning, homework. My own students who are in brick and mortar come home a lot of nights without any homework.
Are you able to prepare your kids to succeed on a standardized test without them having read novels? Like, I wonder also if that, it's like you don't have to read a novel in order to pass the SAT. You need to be able to comprehend and analyze a short passage, right? So in some ways, it's not a disadvantage to not be a reader when it comes to these standardized tests that kind of matter for college.
That's exactly what it is, because first of all, the SATs are digital right now. They're not, pen and paper anymore. The questions have been shortened because of the students' attention spans. There are more questions, but they're shorter questions. Now it's based on analytical thinking. It's based on how fast you can answer a question and how fast you can interpret something. So when we're preparing our students for the SATs, yes, we are still teaching them the classics, not necessarily reading whole books, but, short story excerpts or whatever. But our teaching is focused more on analyzing themes, analyzing main ideas, critically thinking about things, making connections between the real world and what they're reading, because that's what most of the questions on the SATs are these days.
But when you look at these students that you have, a lot of them are going to get an A even though they haven't done the reading, right? Do you think that they have less chance of success in life? I mean, when you look at them, are you like, oh gosh, I hope they really learn this skill somewhere, otherwise they're not going to succeed in life? Or do you look at them and think, they could be super successful and never do the reading, so that's the world we live in?
I think it's an different interpretation of success. And we need to define what success means for us versus for our children who are growing up in this generation. Their definition is going to school, getting a job, making money, that's it, I'm done. So can they be successful? Can this generation be successful the way they're learning? Yeah, absolutely, because that's how life is. Reading a novel for a pleasure of reading a novel and just thinking and romanticizing everything doesn't work for them, because they're getting hit with reality everywhere they turn.
Which is why Della Cassia says she places a huge importance on digital and media literacy, both in her classroom and at home. Because she knows the things her students and her own kids will read will be a lot shorter and probably online.
So right now, because of all that information that's coming at them so fast from everywhere, you have a choice. You can either insulate your kids put them in a bubble and say, absolutely no digital media, no social media, no nothing, you can. Or you can spend the time teaching them how to discern fact from fiction. This is how you research. This is legitimate source. This is not a legitimate source. This is fake news. This is real news. Now, is it great that they could have both? They could read novels and do all of that at the same time? That would be amazing. But I am more concerned about my kids going off in the real world and believing things that are not true and taking them on as facts. And that's when they're going to be in trouble.
Della, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your insights. I really enjoyed this with you.
Thank you. Same. I really appreciate the opportunity, Julie. Thank you.
Della Cassia is a mom, teacher, and freelance writer. She's currently working on a memoir about growing up in war-torn Lebanon and immigrating to the United States. So how did we get to this point where kids don't have the same stamina for reading books that they used to? Well, a lot of us grew up writing book reports or filling out reading logs every night that our parents had to sign. But teachers these days are starting to turn away from that, maybe out of fear that they're going to turn kids off of reading by making it tedious. There's also this.
When you see a mom wheeling a 3-year-old and the mom is on her phone and the 3-year-old has an iPad in their lap, what do you think is happening? Kids are not reading books.
Victoria Waller has been teaching young kids to read for 40 years. She's an educational therapist and a reading tutor for children with learning disabilities, which she calls learning differences. 20% of American kids fall into this category, and they might be at the greatest risk of being turned off of book reading because they often struggle to read at all.
I have found my students with learning differences have the most incredible passions.
And that is Waller's secret weapon, tapping into the things kids already love to get them reading.
Reading, you have to understand. It includes listening to a story. It includes being read to. It includes graphic novels, baseball cards, comic books, Pokemon cards. I've taught kids to read using all of the Pokemon cards, like Charmander, there's your CH sound. Oh, DER's DER. I use what they love to teach them.
In one of her favorite projects, Waller has her student research a specific subject or person that's really interesting to them.
One child, he was interested in everything with the Titanic, everything. So they go to the internet. You know, they're looking up how to find things, so you do have to know how to read.
And this is all in preparation for a big interview.
Whoever my students are interested in, I've been, knock on wood, very lucky. I have found them. And we found Robert Ballard, who found the Titanic. And Robert Ballard said, dream big. Don't let anybody talk you out of your dreams.
And then she has the kids write about their experience.
If he can't write or spell, usually my kids have trouble spelling, they dictate to me. So he did a whole book, and I typed it up, put it into one of these hardback books that you can buy on Amazon, and then he could read it because he wrote it. They come to me and they learn to read, and then they're very happy because they're succeeding.
Dr. Vicki, how early does it start? How early do you like parents to start? Do you recommend instilling a love of reading?
I try to tell my parents, read to them, even if they're 2 years old. And even when I just gave 15 books to a person who just had a baby, I said, as soon as that baby's eyes are going, show the pop-up books and show all the little books that have colors in them.
To an infant, like a newborn?
Yeah, well, as soon as they're sitting up a little bit, and you show the pictures, and who cares? They're going to eat the book first, but so what? Then they get used to, mommy sits with me and holds me and reads me. They don't know what a book is, but if you start early, as soon as they're aware, this woman across the street said at 5 months, this kid's reading, sitting with her and watching as she turns the pages and reads the little rhymes. And you have to get them whatever they're passionate about. I mean, I think that's the most important thing.
Victoria Waller is an educational therapist and author of the book, Yes, Your Child Can, Creating Success for Children with Learning Differences. Now, it probably doesn't surprise you that students sometimes shirk their reading assignments. We've always found ways to skim, skip, or read the Cliff's Notes. But what's happening now does seem to be different than that. At least college professors at some of the most elite academic institutions in the country seem to think so. One humanities teacher at Columbia told The Atlantic magazine that a student of hers didn't read even one book in all of high school. Other professors have gone on record to say their students are not prepared to do the reading either.
Students last semester, when I asked them, at what point do you typically get tired when you're reading or frustrated? And one student is like, usually it's page 2.
So when students not only won't, but can't read full books, what are teachers supposed to do? We'll talk to a professor at a selective university who's grappling with that right now. That's coming up next on Top of Mind from the BYU Radio Podcast Network. I'm Julie Rose. Hey, it's Julie. There is another podcast I think you're going to like from the BYU Radio family of podcasts, so I wanted to pass along the word. It's called In Good Faith. Join host Stephen Perry as he connects with believers from various religions, Christians, Buddhists, Jews, Muslims, and much, much more. Listening to their captivating stories is an opportunity to deepen our own understanding of faith, religion, and spirituality. Plus, Stephen is really well-traveled, and his global perspective brings a unique richness to each conversation. Elevate your appreciation for the divine with In Good Faith. It's an inspiring journey of unity and enlightenment. Listen anywhere you get podcasts.
15 or 20 years ago, I was regularly assigning 4, 5, 6, even at one point up to 9 books in a semester course.
Jonathan Malesic teaches writing at Southern Methodist University. It's a private college in Dallas, Texas. And he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times recently about how his own students weren't doing their reading assignments.
Over time, in the last 7 or 8 years, and especially in the last 4 years, I've been assigning fewer books to the point where I was assigning 0 books. And it seemed like the impulse to meet students where they are just meant meeting them, kind of lower and lower down the ladder to the point where I wasn't sure if I could expect students to read anything.
Why would you lower your expectations of them instead of just give them lower grades?
That's a very good question. And partly I think that if everyone did that, if every instructor were responding to students' diminished ability to read or diminished endurance for reading by giving them lower grades, that would be one thing. It's hard to be the one person. I guess I'd say it's kind of a collective action problem.
You've seen a system-wide, kind of just a general acceptance that kids today are just not going to do it. So let's find some other way to instruct them.
Yeah, the short answer is yes.
Wow.
I resist the kids today response. And I think that as an educator, I look for, all right, let's figure out what can these students in front of me do that I can then build on. They come to my classroom having been educated already for at least 12 years and usually more. And I have to assess that, take stock, and be like, all right, what's the next thing that they are able to do? And if you set that bar too high, then, it's not going to do them any good. Something I asked the students on the first day of class was, what is a piece of writing that has had a big impact on you? And the responses were very wide. One talked about the novel, The Parable of the Sower. Another talked about a novel, I don't remember the title, that she had read 13 times. And another talked about a card that her brother had written upon the death of a relative of theirs.
Did any of them mention a newspaper article or a magazine that they've read or like a TikTok thread? I don't know. I guess I just wonder. There's so many different ways to consume today, right? Whereas we had fewer options 20 years ago. I just wonder if they're just, they're consuming writing and reading in just it's more multimedia for them.
Yeah, well, and I mean, we say them. I mean, it's more multimedia for us
Fair
too,
enough.
who are a little older. I mean, in a way, I think that we're reading more than ever. We are constantly writing and reading.
You're talking about email, social media, but it's not novel length. The majority of the reading that we're doing all day long is shorter form.
Right.
Different kinds of things.
Yes. What I am trying to do is to channel the abilities of reading and writing that they have into some of these more traditional directions that I think will serve them well. I think that a lot of these old-fashioned skills are worth rebuilding. If you can read something longer, if you can write something longer, if you can imagine an audience and figure out how to convince them of something, that's going to strengthen your mind for whatever lies ahead in your career and out.
Do you aspire, though, to have your students have the self-motivation to be able to read a full-length book? I mean, is that important to them, do you think, or have you kind of just let that go as like, this is the new reality that we're in?
I mean, it's important to me. I don't know if it's important to them. My hope is to show them that it's worth it. And I think that with a little bit more push from educators and certainly from parents as well, we could rebuild their ability and endurance to read. If you're not kind of working that muscle, or if anything, if you're not building up that endurance, then you won't be able to use it later on.
I mean, do you get the sense that they are not also reading for pleasure themselves? That they're not reading books, period, or they're just not, I mean, is it possible they're just not reading what you're assigning them because they don't see the relevance of it? They see it more as busy work. They can still pass the test. They can find a way around it. Why am I going to need this in my life? The perpetual question, why does this matter that a student's going to ask?
I think that great books, even just good ones, they are relevant to us because we are human beings. I think sometimes students come to college believing that the purpose of college is to get their first job, that they're going to spend 4+ years and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a job that they might have for 6 months. And if that's true, then no, college is not worth it. Don't go to college. Figure something else out. It's an incredibly inefficient way to get a first job. If, however, college is about preparing you and transforming you into a person who can do much greater things with your mind, who can learn independently, who can communicate effectively, who can think deeply and help others to think deeply, to solve problems and all of that, then it's absolutely worth it, because that kind of training is hard to get elsewhere. College is one of the few places you can actually do it. It's worth it to put in the effort and to try to get as much out of that experience as possible. That will help you in your career, but it will also help you in the majority of your life that isn't your career.
And that is why Malesic, in that New York Times opinion piece he wrote, promised to assign one book to his students this semester. Now, it's far from the 9 books he used to assign, but he says it's a start.
So yeah, we're as we speak, my students have been assigned James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. So on the first day, we read this 8-page passage in class silently. And those very students who said, well, I can't even read past a couple of pages, were able to read for 20 or 30 minutes straight without any difficulty if I was in the room. And then I was like, okay, so you did that. You did great. The next assignment is just 4 times as long. So just give yourself however long it took you times 4, and you can do it. And yeah, I went in with a lot of trepidation, to be honest. I didn't know if it would work, and I didn't know if they would like the book. But we had a really good class yesterday. I believe that most of them gave it a good effort.
Jonathan Malesic is a professor of writing at Southern Methodist University. He's also an author. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Incidentally, college graduates are the group that has had the steepest decline in book reading over the last 2 decades. They're now reading on average 6 fewer books per year. But another important trend here is how those of us who still read books are consuming those books. More and more are listening. The publishing industry says audiobooks have experienced double-digit growth for 11 straight years. Now, I am not an audiobook user, but my friend Anna White is. And when we started working on this episode, I immediately thought of her. She's a college grad, music teacher, mother of 5, and she is the most prolific reader I know.
Probably, I read like between 8 and 12, I feel like, a month. And sometimes I have multiple books going. I read a lot of historical fiction. I love historical fiction, memoirs. I read like Harry Potter adjacent sort of fantasy. I'm not a thriller horror person, but I read almost everything else.
What is it that you're getting from this reading? Like, what is it doing in your life for you?
That's a great question. I feel like when I started listening to audiobooks, it was like in 2018, and you knew me in 2017, and I had a horrible year, the worst year of my life. My older sister, the one that's just above me, died right after I had given birth to twins, and my pregnancy had been really rough. I had been in the hospital for 3 months, and then they were in the hospital for another 2.5 months after that, but I was in a pretty hard, sad place. As I came out of that year, one of my really good book friends, we were roommates in college, and we still are in a book club together. And she said, you know what, you should start listening to books, because I couldn't sit down and read. I didn't have the time. I didn't have the brain space. And I'm like, that probably really pulled me out, because since then I listen all the time. It got me out of my funk that I was in and put myself in other people's shoes. It's always been a place for me to recognize that other people go through hard things too. And I feel like more than anything else, that's what I love about reading, is being able to not get stuck in your own head and your own life and your own space, but kind of being able to look outside yourself, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's really helped me do that.
Does your comprehension differ, do you think, when you're reading on paper versus listening?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I actually don't know. I am usually doing something else while I'm listening, but I'm also one that if I realize that I have not been paying attention and something's going on and I'm like, how did we get here? Mm-hmm. I don't keep going. Like, I go back and I figure out what I missed. And I also, if I'm reading a complicated book, like last year I read The Covenant of Water, which is a really thick, heavy, long timeline book. I had the print copy also because I went, like in that book, I went back and I re-looked at different sections physically that helped me kind of place who was talking, when it was, things like that. So I do sometimes have both of them.
Yeah.
When it's something that's like, this is a lot and I want to make sure I'm really digging in.
Yeah. Here's the big question that I am always wondering, because I don't listen to audiobooks. When you are listening to an audiobook, are you reading?
Yeah.
That counts as reading to you?
It counts as reading to me.
Why?
Yeah. Because even though I'm not seeing the words actually with my eyes, to me, reading is immersing yourself in a different place, in a different world. The thing that I love about reading is getting different perspectives, getting different experiences. And you're still doing that. You're still experiencing the world differently. So for me, it is, I was thinking, since you asked me about doing this, I've kind of been pondering like, why do I love reading so much? And I have this memory that I think about pretty regularly. I read or started reading The Kite Runner, and I didn't finish it because it was heavy. And I was like, this is too much for me. I'm not going to read this. And I regret that. I regret that I looked at another experience and said, your experience is too heavy for me to take on, and so I'm not doing that. And I feel like we really do a disservice to each other in the world when we do things like that. I feel like it's responsible to hear hard things. I mean, if you can say, like, I don't want to hear your story because it's too hard for me, that's a place of privilege. Sure, are there times where it's like, I can't do this right now. Maybe you're taking on some heavy things in your own life and you have to kind of put some space. Yes, of course. I didn't read books like that when I was in my dark time. But I do want to make sure that I am just not, it's not just fluff and it's not just to escape the world's things for me. Like, I feel like it's like traveling for some people, you know, where you go and you experience other cultures. This is my way of doing that.
Big thanks to my friend Anna for sharing her story. I get some of my best recommendations from her, so I can't wait to see what she reads next. Okay, so about the whole is listening to a book actually reading thing, the research seems to suggest that it is. Neuroscientists at UC Berkeley found that the same cognitive and emotional parts of our brains are stimulated when we listen to stories and when we read. But studies have also shown that students who read a text have better comprehension than students who listen to it. It just really depends on how closely they're paying attention, which makes total sense if you ask me. But here's what I didn't realize. It's actually digital screens that are having the biggest effect on our book reading habits.
The mindset with which you come to what you're reading tends to be compromised. And when you survey students, they'll tell you this. The medium invites shorter reading, simpler reading, faster reading, interrupted reading.
Up next, a reading expert explains how something that has become second nature for most of us has altered our ability to read. This is Top of Mind from the BYU Radio Podcast Network. I'm Julie Rose.
There is a new podcast out now called Constant Wonder Kids. It's an adaptation of the Signal award-winning podcast Constant Wonder. And this Constant Wonder Kids version curates stories from Constant Wonder into little adventures for your little explorers. Everyday moments become extraordinary nature explorations as they dive deep into the ocean with whale sharks or cheer for tiny athletes at the Hedgehog Olympics. It's perfect for when your brain's got an itch that needs to be scratched. You can listen to Constant Wonder Kids on the BYU Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Naomi Barron is a professor emerita of linguistics at American University in Washington, D.C., and she has been interested in how we read for decades.
Recently, I've been very, very interested in and concerned about the ways that technology are affecting the way that we read and that we write.
Barron says the COVID pandemic sped up a trend that was already underway.
Digital reading had already become a reality in many, many, not just high schools and colleges, in lower school and middle school as well. Many, many courses had gone online, or when the courses hadn't gone online, the reading had become digital. Publishers have a model which says, push digital, not print. It's an economic issue. It costs far less for them to do digital distribution than it does print.
And anymore these days, the cost for an ebook is the same as for a hardback, right? I mean, there's very little difference. It used to be
Right.
cheaper, but...
Except textbooks have contracts with institutions, the textbook publishers, and then they package books and say, well, for one semester worth of books for only $195, your students can get any book we publish. So there are all these models out there that had been in place. Digital reading has been pushed by many well-meaning faculty saying, I want to save you money. And given how expensive tuition is, and particularly in the United States, not to mention textbooks, I can only applaud that.
Has digital reading changed the definition of reading, of what reading is, what the act of reading is in our lives?
I'm pausing before answering your question because it's a really good question that doesn't have a simple answer. Does it change what your eyes are doing on the page? No. I mean, there's studies that have been done showing that the way your eyes move on the page, there's a process called saccades, and your eye jumps forward or your eye jumps backward, and we do that normally in the process of reading. It's still words that you see with your eyes. You still have the option of reading as slowly or as quickly as you want to. But it's the things that we don't do, that we could do, that are changing the nuanced meaning of what it means to read. There are various literary luminaries who have said there's no such thing as reading, there's only rereading. And what we know from my research and that of other people is, number one, people tend not to go back to an earlier passage, even though it's really simple. You can do a word search. You can find your character, but people don't tend to do it if it's digital. They're much more likely to do it if it's in print. And this is all doable digitally, but it's not something that technology, the medium, drives us to do.
So are you saying, Professor Barron, that we are reading less today and reading less complicated stuff because we're reading more digitally? Like you blame the increase in digital reading for the decline in reading generally.
I'll say it's a piece of the puzzle. We have so much data now from so many different countries that say statistically, most people, most of the time, and this goes for middle school up through university and postgraduate, the comprehension level tends to be lower if you're reading digitally, particularly for informational kind of text. Coupled with that is what I call the mindset, as opposed to the medium issue, the mindset issue, which says, if I'm reading something on my phone, you know what, I do all this other stuff on my phone or doing it on a tablet. And I'll just stop for a second and I'll buy a pair of shoes, or I'll buy an airline ticket, or I'll check my Twitter feed, or whatever it is. The mindset with which you come to what you're reading tends to be compromised. And when you survey students, they'll tell you this. The medium invites shorter reading, simpler reading, faster reading, interrupted reading. Then comes social media. And the major thing to remember about social media is everything must be short. And also, everything has a really minuscule half-life. It's gone. And if it's gone, it couldn't have mattered that much.
I have noticed that I like to read novels, that I check out from the library that are like thrillers, my fun reading. And I like to read those on my phone because it's easy. I've always got it in my pocket. I can always pick it up and kind of page through. But that I struggle to read books that way when they're dense, they're more dense, and especially like for work or when I'm trying to really absorb information. Is that a me thing, or is there something about digital reading that actually does make it a little harder to absorb complex ideas?
So think about the notion of scrolling on a phone or scrolling on any kind of digital device. If you're scrolling along, you're not stopping to think. And one of the things we know from a bunch of studies that have been done is if you compare comprehension rates on people reading something when they're scrolling versus reading something when they're paging, read a whole page and then go to the next page, the comprehension level tends to be higher. And people will tell you, and there are bunches of studies done on just this, it's shorter to read digitally. It's the same words, it's the same sentences, but if you have a perception that it's shorter, then you're probably going to read faster. So I think in some ways the biggest challenge for us to read digitally something that could be meaningful for us, and that also goes for fiction, by the way. You read something by Jhumpa Lahiri, and you stop on a sentence. It just makes you stop in your tracks and say, how did she think to put those words together? And we tend not to do that in reading digitally, in large part because we tend to feel pressed. You feel you have to keep going, or else you're not playing by the rules. The rules say you're supposed to be able to move fast on digital. So that's why the medium itself is not the problem. It's how we approach the medium. Overwhelmingly, there is no education given on how to read digitally mindfully.
What does mindful reading look like?
It looks like beginning with the assumption that there's something on that medium, whether it's digital or print, that's worth my time. That I should put away whatever it is I might otherwise be engaged in. Let's say I have an e-reader. Put away your phone, because what I'm reading is going to be worth my attention. It means convincing yourself that mind wandering, what's going to be for lunch in the cafeteria today, is probably not going to help not just your concentration, but your involvement, your caring about what the author is saying to you. So an awful lot of what I would see as mindful reading is the setup, as much as it is what's happening while you're reading the words, the sentences, the paragraphs and pages. And then mindful means stopping every once in a while. If it's a novel, asking, do I like this character? What do I think this character is feeling? Can I feel that person's pain by reading the description of what's going on? What do I think might happen next? So you take a whodunit thriller. Do you stop and say, I'll bet I can figure out who did it. Let me run through the possibilities. Or if it's nonfiction, particularly if it's more complicated, to stop and say, do I agree? Do I disagree? What's the argument I would give to this friend of mine who would not agree with any of what's here, but I sort of think what I'm reading is correct? How would you defend yourself? How would you defend this author? Which means stopping and thinking. That is, it's not a race, but I need to stop and say, this author is worth your attention. Bring your mind back to what you're doing. You can do it. Let's go.
So, Professor Barron, if you were trying to ignite a love of reading books in a 10-year-old, would you put a Kindle reader in their hands, a digital reader, or like an actual book in their hands?
I'd put both. And the reason I would put both is as a way of saying we live in a world that has both, and you have to learn how to deal with both. Before there were streets and before there were automobiles, you didn't have to train people to look both ways before crossing a street. If we have a technology that's going to be with us in some form or other for a long time to come, it's critical that we learn how to use it in the most productive way we can. The things you can do with the digital technology that you can't do with print. So one of the things that many, particularly middle school and high school students, told us, because they were in an international school and the school was taught in English, but English wasn't the native language for almost any of them, they said, the wonderful thing, what do you like most about digital? I can access a dictionary. And that mattered. So there are lots of good things that the digital devices can do for us. How do you develop pedagogies for kids to make both kinds of media, print and digital, effective at what they're best at?
What does it matter if we are doing less book reading, if we're reading fewer books? Because you could argue that in today's society, the most important skills are really to be able to consume large amounts of information coming at you in lots of different directions. And for this kind of deep thinking and, reading and then trying to like analyze and condense it, like AI already can do that for us. And it's probably even going to get better at doing that. So really, I mean, you probably could be quite successful in life only ever reading short form stuff and AI summaries of the long form stuff. What if anything, do we lose if we generally are not reading book length content?
It's one thing to talk about a direction in which much of society, maybe most, is going, as opposed to where we want it to go. It is absolutely the case that there are so many forces driving education, let me just put it in those terms, to short informational reading. You look at the standardized tests that are given these days, and they're these days all given digitally. You look at something like the PISA exam for 15-year-olds worldwide. You look at other kinds of tests that are given, the Pearls exam for reading for younger kids. They're all short passages, and they're heavily informational. Similarly, the Common Core curriculum in the United States did away with much of the required long-form reading. And the assumption was, well, we're all going to live in a world where processing information fast is what we need to do. That's an assumption. And I will just ask whether we want to have a world run by people who don't know how to stop and think. Critical thinking is not summarizing information and spouting it back. Critical thinking is drawing upon things you've read, things you've learned from life experience, and much of people's life experience gets encapsulated in books. And if we don't have opportunities that we give to our students, that we give to ourselves to stop and think and read about what the world has been like and other kinds of possible worlds we could make and what might be wrong with our world that we learn from looking at what was wrong with someone else's world. The reason that we still read Greek tragedy is there are lots of tragedies happening today from which we can learn from Sophocles and Euripides and Aeschylus. But if we don't do that, the world is just recreated every day by what happened to be in your news feed. And that is not a way to live.
Naomi Barron is a professor emerita of linguistics at American University. Her most recent book is Who Wrote This? About the influence of AI on writing. She's also author of How We Read Now. And she's got a forthcoming book about the influence of AI on reading. Professor Barron, thank you so much for your time and your insights today.
Thank you. I've enjoyed talking.
So, what are your book reading habits? I'd love to hear about it. Are you a paper-only person? Do you use a designated e-reader? Or are you mostly reading books on your phone like I am lately? What about audiobooks? Do you notice a difference in the experience between those formats? If you're a parent, I'd love to hear what you're noticing in the reading habits of your own kids. You can send your thoughts to topofmind@byu.edu and be sure to include your book recommendations. I'd love to hear them. Top of Mind is a BYU radio podcast. Today's episode was produced by Caleb Leach, Isabella Sosa, and James Hoops, with help from Samuel Benson, Sam Payne, and me. Our audio engineer and sound design team includes Brandon Lewis and Lauren Sandberg. I'm Julie Rose. We'll talk soon.